Hi and welcome to Poly Originals with Fiona Abel-Smith. So for today's project I thought we'd make these really sweet, fun little fairy conker shell houses. You can open the doors and pop some fairy lights inside. I was out for a walk one day when I saw all the conker shells having fallen down after a big wind, and by conkers we call them conkers in the UK, but of course it's the horse chestnut tree. The nuts that fall down from that, and I just loved all this green prickliness with the browns and the fact that it all seemed to have, when they fell off, the little twig attached. So I thought that would make a great fairy house, and so that of course is what I then sort of planned to do. So that is the shell, obviously, as near as I wanted to make it, which we're going to do today with our little fairy house door which opens and the windows, but it needed to have something on top, which is why I came up with the peacock petal cane. And that just sits on and creates a nice roof. For the equipment we need, it's actually all pretty standard, although it's quite a long list. The only thing that you wouldn't necessarily have at home, unless you obviously work with polymer clay already, is one of these, which is a polymer clay blade. I often refer to these as tissue blades. A little craft knife, a small roller, something like this cable needle, it's about 4mm cable needle, or just something which you can smooth and use as a tool to smooth over seams. As a texturing tool, I'm going to use one of these, which has got sort of lots of little wire prongs on the end, and it gives really nice sort of grooves for when you're doing things like the trunks and the stems and branches. If you don't have that, then you can just tape together several cocktail sticks, and that will give you a similar effect. You do need a fairly thin, something like this beading needle, which is polymer clay beading needle. Something tempered, so it's not going to bend much, is the best for what we're going to do. And this, I believe, is a 0.8mm thickness. Doesn't really matter, but something certainly less than a millimetre. An ordinary beading needle would do, as long as part of it doesn't go narrower at one point. A head pin. Use a head pin because it's got a nice stopper at the top, and this is going to be for our hinge on our door. You could just use a piece of wire without that if you've got it, but it obviously gives a nice finish if you've got that at the top of it. And because we've got that and we're going to have to cut it, then just a pair of flat-nosed cutters. An extra single cocktail stick is handy, and we're going to use a bit of wire in certain places. Now this is aluminium wire, and I use this because it's lovely and easy to bend. This one's about 1mm in thickness, but anything up to about 2mm is fine, and we're just going to embed this into the clay just to give a bit more strength to certain parts of what we're doing. A couple of round cutters to make holes in our fairy house, for the top where the roof fits in and also for the windows. So this window one is actually 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and this one is 3 centimetres or 1¼ inch in diameter. We're going to use black pepper, ground black pepper, to give a nice effect on the outside of our chestnut shell, so get some of that. And we are going to use some liquid clay, so I've just decanted some into a pot here, and I have a small brush that I use on a regular basis with the liquid clay, and I will just be using that to dot it on for certain places that we need it as we go around. I'm going to use a polystyrene ball as my centre for my fairy house, and this one is about 2 inches across or 5 centimetres. Now I know, having used these before, and I get them in the UK, these are perfectly safe to bake with. All that happens when you put it in the oven is it shrinks down and comes out like a little mini one like this. These differ around the world, so if you're not sure about it, then please don't use it. Obviously safety first. You can always put one in and test, but if there's any fumes or anything come off this, obviously do not use them. If you don't have any of these, then you can, as a very easy alternative, just take lots of ordinary tissue paper, and I literally do mean tissue paper, scrunch it up into a tight ball, get it till it's about the same size as what you want, then wrap this in a single layer of foil. Push it in your hands and get it as nice and smooth and circular as you can, and that works just as well as an alternative for this. And to start with, when I was making this project, I was using this rather than the balls, and then I thought, oh, actually let's see if these work. So this works just as well if you don't have any of these. For a measuring thing later on, we need a circle that is about 3.5 inches or 8 centimetres across. So I'm just using this, which is a little semicircular bowl I've got purely because of the size. But anything you've got, you know, whether it's inside of a sticky tape or just some cutters, anything about that size will be fine for what we need. I'm going to use just a regular bowl, but one that can go in the ovens. It's just a dessert bowl, and this is going to be for our fairy house roof, so that when you put it in, the petals actually curl up the side. For texture, I've got a little bit of a sponge sheet here. So this is the sort of the packing sponge you get. Just gives a nice texture around the outside of our chestnut shell. And when we do the leaves, I've got some material. Now, this has got a very strong straight line in it, and it's quite thick, and I'm literally going to press the clay in between and give a nice texture onto our petals with that. You will need just a plain sheet of paper, and this is purely to put the pepper on so you don't mess up all your work surface and everything else, so just a sheet of paper. And then we will need some card, just ordinary sort of card that you use for making card actual stock, so as in greetings cards, and just enough to cut a circle out that I said, and then a long sheet and a couple of other bits and pieces, so not too much in the size needed for that one. And because we're marking it and cutting it out, you need scissors and a pencil, and you'll also need some sticky or clear tape just to stick the card together. I use the measuring sheet on occasion. This is the one I use. It's freely downloadable from www.printablepaper.net. I've laminated this, and this is the one I use, which is 4 squares to 1 inch, but they also have centimetre ones available, so just use whatever you wish. And finally, just to add a little bit of decorative addition to the outside, I'm just using some ordinary acrylic paint. It's a dark brown, this one. Van Dyke brown is what this is called. And I'm putting it on with one of these little brushes. This is one of a set of brushes I have from Teresa Salgado from the Tiny Pandora Crafting Boutique, and they're really good to use with polymer clay and paints and other bits and pieces, so I'll be using that one. I also have a proper artist's brush that I use, and this is one that I've used for many years for alcohol inks, and I've just got a selection of the alcohol inks, and I'm going to use these to colour the windows of our fairy house. Again, you don't have to use these, just use whatever you want to colour them. You can just leave them plain. Felt tip pens would work, for instance, so you could use that as an alternative. But if you have got alcohol inks, then I've just gone for greens and orange and a little yellow colour. Other than that, you need wet wipes and tissues just to clean your hands and your equipment as you go along, and as normal, a pasta machine dedicated to polymer clay use. If you don't have a pasta machine, then you can simply stack playing cards on either side and roll your clay in between and vary the size or the amounts of cards you've got to vary the thickness of the clay, and simply do all the techniques I'm doing. But where I say use a pasta machine, just simply fold it, for instance, and roll, fold and roll if you're doing something like a Skinner blend. So I think that's it. So as I say, quite a few bits there, but fairly straightforward, which most of you will have around the house. And now I'll move on to the clay for today's project. Okay, let's run through the clay that we're using. So today I'm using Fimo Soft, but all well-known brands of polymer clay will work well for this technique. So there's a lot of clay on the board here. You're going to need quite a bit for the petal, quite a bit for the green for the outside, but when you're doing these sort of colours, mixing up the twigs and the lichen and everything else, I'm using fresh polymer clay here, but just have a rummage through your leftover bits and pieces. I'm giving you this just because obviously a lot of people want to start from scratch and know which colours I'm using, and I'll give you the amounts, but please don't break into fresh packs if you've got leftover bits and pieces. And the same for all these, just mix up your own colours or use what you've got left over from other projects. But to run through you what we're going to need for the inside of our chestnut casing, for the underneath bit, we've got Sahara, and I've got 1 ounce or 28 grams of the clay here. To do the green for the outer layer, which also includes other bits and pieces in the petal roof as well, this gives you more than enough of a colour mix, and when you finish your project you'll end up probably with about that much left over. However, it's easier, as we know, to mix more, so you've got enough to use, than to mix too little and to have to come back to it. So I've actually got, for each of those two, the apple green and the lemon yellow, 1 ounce or 28 grams of each, and then half that amount of the olive green, and together they mix up to this nice colour. For my petal, I wanted to keep the petal leaf roof nice and sort of subtle colours, so I have gone for the tangerine, the flamingo, the antique rose and pearl, and in each of these I have got ½ ounce or 14 grams. I've got the same amount of the dolphin grey, and I'm actually going to mix that in with the tangerine and that in with the flamingo, so it literally dulls these two colours down as well, and all of those are going to be put together in one big Skinner blend to make the size of the petal we need for today's project. And the inserts of the petal are going to be these ones. So again, I've got the same amount, so ½ ounce or 14 grams of the lilac and the pearl, and then just a small amount, so 1/8 of an ounce or 3½ grams of the brilliant blue and the dolphin grey. And again, I'm going to mix that with the blue and the dolphin grey into one new colour, and that gives you a really nice soft sort of bluey purpley colour. And then to wrap around the outside for our petal and give the extra detail, I'm going to use the bronze, and I've got ½ ounce or 14 grams of this. To do the leaf cane, we're going to use a bit of our leftover green from here, but then add it to white and some more olive green. So for these I've got ½ ounce or 7 grams for each of those colours. Moving on to this, which is going to be for the twigs, the doors and the decorative bits on our chestnut casing, we have got ½ ounce or 7 grams of the chocolate and the caramel, and then just 1/4 of those amounts, so tiny bits of the bronze and the Sahara. Coming on to the lichen, we've got 3½ grams or about 1/8 of an ounce of the Sahara, the dolphin grey and the antique rose, and then just half that amount of the caramel and the bronze. And last but not least, to do the windows, I've got a little bit of translucent clay, so it's probably about 5 grams or about 1/6 of an ounce. All of the clay needs to be conditioned thoroughly in the colour groups as I've got them, so all of these separate, but that's together, that's together, that's together, and those three are together. Do those in probably sort of half the amount at a time, because that's a lot of clay to put through the pasta machine at one particular time. I will put all of these colours through on setting number 3 of my pasta machine, because that's just generally what I do, which is a medium setting of my pasta machine. On my machine, 0 is thick and 9 is thin, but when I come to actually work with them, I will probably change the settings I'm going through, and for these smaller bits, I find it easier actually for these to make them up into a roll, a small sausage when I'm working, rather than have them flat. So I'm going to get all the conditioning done to start with, because obviously I'm doing it as a tutorial. If you would rather, don't do it all at once. This is the first colour we're going to start with, so if nothing else, get this conditioned and come back to me when that's done. If anyone is unsure about conditioning polymer clay, I do have a video with a few tips and techniques on how to use a pasta machine to help you condition the clay, and I'll put a link to that video in the description below this one. So let's get started on today's project. So the Sahara's gone through on setting number 3, and I've got myself a longish strip, and I've done it so that it's just about wide enough to fit around the polystyrene ball. I'm just going to neaten off one end, simply because it's easier just to join up cut ends than ragged ones. Pull it round, just put it ever so slightly taut, so you get a nice fixing around the polystyrene ball. Chop off the end there. And then just roll across the seam to get it nicely joined. Now we are going to cut a hole through the clay in one or either end, so if one end doesn't actually meet all the way at the top, that's absolutely fine. But if you are just going to carry on doing it as if they were going to meet, you just cut down towards the bottom, fold the clay over and take off the excess. Same again, chop down, fold the clay over, take off the excess, and continue doing that all the way around, both top and bottom, until you have it nicely joined. As I say, on one particular end it doesn't matter if it doesn't completely join up. So for instance this one, I'll have a gap, and that's absolutely fine. If you do chop too much off, simply patch. Because we don't worry about this being very neat. This is just the underlayer. And of course the actual casing for a chestnut itself isn't neat. It's all sorts of bobbly and all sorts of wonderful weird shapes. So don't worry about it being overly round. Put all your spare bits to one side. We can use those instead of new bits of clay in the colours that I mentioned earlier on when we do both the wood effect and the sort of the lichen. And then just very gently with your roller go over all the seams till it's all joined up. When the seams are all done, just give it a roll round. That neatens it all up. So that was where I had my gap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the larger of my cutters, and this is going to be the top where we fit the petal roof. And just pull that out. And you're doing exactly the same whether you're doing it with the polystyrene insert or whether you're using the foil and paper tissue insert. Exactly the same process. Find somewhere where you think you're going to have a door. So this is going to sit sort of more or less upright, but not quite, a slight angle. So going over a very slight angle with the back coming out here. So the door is going to be about halfway down. And just put yourself a sort of arch shape in with a flat bottom, whatever size and shape you want. Again, doesn't have to be regular, this is a fairy door, but if you can, carefully take the shape out so it's not too distorted and put that on one side just for a second. Then you're going to decide on the size of your windows, so I've gone for this one, so I'm going to have one at one side, one at the other. And last but not least, opposite the door and sort of out round the back, you're going to want somewhere where the branch is going to go in. So just with a needle like that, the cable needle, or some other pokey tool, just poke yourself in a hole so we've got somewhere for the branch to go. So that's now ready for baking, but the one thing we want to do first is to make ourselves a little door template. So take the piece of clay that you've just cut out, get yourself a little offcut of card, and draw around it. Now you're straight away you will go larger than the door, and that is absolutely fine because we do want it slightly larger than that piece. Put F on it so you know which way is the front. Chop round. And then just put it up to see how you're doing. So you want it just slightly larger than that opening, and at the moment that works absolutely fine. So put that to one side. We'll come back to that in just a minute. Your offcut of clay can now go back with the rest of them, and this is now ready to bake. As we're using a bowl, I'll just place it in the bowl. Doesn't matter if it rolls over or anything like that, because as I say, this is just an under shape, so we're not worried about that at all. Bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. So let's get that one in and get that one baked, and whilst we're doing that we'll move on to a few other bits and pieces. So the colours for doing the door and the branch and all the other little wood effects I've put into just small sausage rolls, and then all we're going to do is we're going to chop this into random pieces. Having finished, just push them back in nice random fashion into a ball. And then start to roll into a sausage shape. And you may find, if you're lucky, that straight away you get a bit that looks very wood-like. If you do, just go with it. If not, then just fold it in half and roll again, and keep doing that till you get a piece that you like the look of. So I'm looking for a piece, when I get a piece I quite like the look of, probably about 3 inches long, so about 7.5 centimetres. And that's about 1/4 inch wide, so probably sort of just around 1/2 centimetre. Put this piece to one side for a second, because we'll need to do something to this once our inner bit has baked. And then with that piece to one side, we can start to work on a small piece to go right at the top of the petal roof. So again, just a small piece, probably about 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres, and about that same width, so just less than about 1/4 inch. And in this one, we're just going to split it down the middle. You want the wire to go inside, but also to have a bit spare. You can always chop that off later. Roll it around to make sure it's fitted nicely, and then you want a nice tapered end. And what you're looking for is the bit where the wire is, to very gently bend it round to make a sort of curved shape. Quite often the wire will poke through, so just either fold back and redo the pointy end, or just stick it back in, whichever works best for you. But you want the wire to be at the main top part of this, so that it really does act as a proper handle, so that when you pick it up, the wire is inside the bit at the top. When you're happy with that, that can go on a tile to bake, and we'll put that to one side. Going back to this, you want an extra piece which is going to go around the door. This can be a smaller piece, but again, go for about 3 inches, 7.5 centimetres just to start with. We can make this smaller as we need. Again, put this piece on one side, and then we're left with the bits to do the door and to do all the decorative bits on the actual chestnut. So with my large bit here, I'm just going to take off quite thick chunky slices, press them sort of next to each other, give them a bit of a roll. And what I'm looking for is I'm going to put this through the pasta machine on setting number 2, so quite a nice good thickness. And what I'm looking for is just to get a pattern on one side that to me looks quite nice and wood-like. So I'm going to fold it and put it back through, and each time I'm going to fold it the same way so that these lines start to elongate. There we go, so that's a piece now I'm happy with. Find your template, put it down on the bit you like and chop round. Turn it the wrong way up, and with whatever tool you're planning on using, either one of these or a single needle or several cocktail sticks, just scrape down to make lots of lines going straight down. This is the underneath, the inside of the door. When you've done that, go on the tile that you're going to bake your piece on and put the door down on that, and do exactly the same on the front, the good side. With the blunt side of my craft knife, I'm then just going to push in some slightly deeper lines, almost to look as if they were sort of making planks of wood in the door. And we fill those details in with a bit of acrylic paint later on. So there's your door. Next thing to do is we need to make a little handle. So decide which side the hinges are going to go on. So my hinges are going to go on this side, so the handle's going to go on this side. So just a little hole in, and take a little bit of liquid clay on the end of a small brush, drop a tiny bit in the hole, pull off a small bit from the left over bits that you were just using. Make it fairly round, but then taper one end, and it's the tapered end that fits inside the hole, and that then just presses down to give a nice neat handle. To do the hinges, we're going to take a thin beading needle, or as I said, a small ordinary needle, or even a piece of very straight wire would do. Obviously this is nicely tempered, so it's not going to bend, which makes it better than wire. I'm just going to take off a very small piece of clay, roll it into a ball, and then flatten that down to a log sort of shape. And then you want to put the needle, if you can, twist it through the middle of that. Once it's on your needle, you're just going to very gently with your finger rub. And what we're going to try and do is make this really thin with just that needle hole on the inside. Takes a bit of practice. Don't worry if it doesn't happen the first time. And also if you find you get lots of air trapped, so the needle actually becomes, you can feel it sort of moving around quite tightly, just if that happens, just take the clay and twist the clay all the way around until it sort of fills up the hole, and then give it a roll again. Because what we're looking for is, having got that done, with your craft knife, just roll the needle under it to give you a nice short piece. And then we want 3 little hinges, and you want it to be so that they fit about there. So if you want to first, put it up so you know that's the line you're working to. And again, give it a roll round, pull the rest back, and you then know that you need 3 hinges to go in that space. They don't have to be all the same, but you do need 3 of them. Once you've got the 3 ready like that, then you need to get your little head pin that you're planning to use for the hinges, and we're going to move them from the needle onto the head pin. So I've gone for one of these darker grey head pins, so very gently just hold in your fingers and twist the needle to pull them off. Slip them onto the end of the head pin. Then put them up next to your door to check for size. If you can, give yourself a little bit of a hint, perhaps just with marking with tiny lines, where that middle one is going to sit. And then with another tiny bit of liquid clay, just put some liquid clay up against that one area of where that hinge is going to sit, because it's only the middle hinge that we want to sit in place. So very gently push that into place. You can take the lines out, but then equally gently make sure these 2 that are next to it are moved away. And you want to also make sure that they're not touching the door. So put your knife down in between, because then when it bakes, you'll be able to pull them off very easily. So what should happen when this piece is baked, that middle hinge there is attached to the door. When we pull this pin out after it's baked, these 2 will be able to be removed. And then when we put it on the door, we attach on the actual fairy house, these 2 attach to the fairy house, and then we can slip this pin back in and you'll have a perfect made hinge. So there's the door, there's the end of our petal top, and once our piece is out of the oven, we can get this piece finished, and then all of these can go and bake. When your piece comes out of the oven and is baked, if you've used one of the polystyrene balls, then that should be sat inside. If you're lucky, it'll have shrunk enough that it'll pop straight out. If it hasn't, then very carefully with your craft knife, whilst it's still in there, just chop a little bit off one side, and then hopefully it should be thin enough to pop out of the hole. If you've used the foil and the paper, then either with the top of your craft knife or even with a pair of pliers, chop down through the top bit of the foil, open up to the tissue paper inside, and then put it in a bowl of water. Let the water go all over the tissue paper, and then either with your fingers or with tweezers you should be able to pull out all the paper, and once all the paper's come out, then you can just peel off the foil from the inside of the fairy house. Okay, so either way, you should get back to this stage. Once you got to this stage, get your nice long piece of aluminium wire, stick it up through the hole, bend with your finger. That's another reason why I like using this wire, because it's so easy to force into shape. And then with this bit, you can actually see the length of what it is you're planning to do. So I probably don't want it any longer than about that, so chop off the excess. Take the piece back out, but you can see from where it's bent the length which needs to be covered with the clay. So go back to your piece that you got ready, chop halfway down this, and this is actually a bit long for what I've got, that's fine, we can chop it off, put it in at the end and bring it up round. Now you want it a bit longer than the where the metal is, and you can feel generally or see whether it pokes out where the metal is. So just take off a bit in excess, and then make sure the wire's nicely hidden away and encased, and get rid of all the seams you've just created. And at this stage, just shape it into whatever shape you want. Make sure that the wire's not going to poke out through the back. And when you're happy with your handle's sort of shape, in the top bit, press down in with your needle tool just to open it out and make it look as though it's an open bit, and with a tiny little offcut from the colour we had beforehand, because the inside of the bark from the chestnuts is a lighter colour, so just push that down inside. You can push it up to make it look as though it's coming up on the outside where the bark is. And then starting with this top area, you can just with the edge of your craft knife start to just distress it a little bit, make it look as though it's sort of been a bit gnarled where it fell off and broke away from the tree. And then on the outside, again with whatever tool you're using, whether it's the cocktail sticks or needles bunched together or one of these tools, just create lots of lines all the way down the outside. You can really scratch quite deep, obviously not down to the wire, but give it a nice lot of texture going in there. And then we're going to pop it back in and press down a bit with the clay, so it's going to get a really nice good fit. And then again, give that a nice bit of texturing. And then just to make it slightly neater, with your sponge texture bit, just gently press over, and that gives quite a nice bark feel or a twig feel to our bit coming out. And all I'm doing at the moment is I'm just holding it in place by putting my finger on the wire there whilst I'm doing that. Once you're completely done, and I will go in and I will take off these bits of green here, then you can sit your piece on a tile. I'm going to put that little handle on there as well, because I don't particularly want those to go shiny. This one I'm not worried about because it's inside of the door, so that can go slightly shiny if it wants. And then as before, tent the whole thing in a piece of foil to protect it should the oven spike during baking, and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. So I've got my green clay nicely mixed up for the outside of the chestnut shell colour, and I conditioned it on setting number 3, but then I've put it down onto setting number 4, so just one thinner. And I was going to chop myself a nice piece to go around the outside. So as before, chop off one end neatly. I'm just going wider, top and bottom. Coat the whole of your bottom bit in a layer of liquid clay that's going to give it a feeling of being sticky or tacky but not slippy. And have a wet wipe to hand so that as soon as that's done you can clean your fingers. And we're going to coat this in a single layer of this green colour, exactly the same way as we covered the initial polystyrene casing. So chop off where it overlaps and then just push it round and chop back through as you go. Any joins, smooth over with the needle. In the middle bit where it goes into the centre, I will sometimes just push the clay down and then you can cut round. And once I've got it all nicely covered, then I'll cut out the holes for the door and the windows. Okay, once all the pieces are out and you've got your shape back to where it was, you also need to find the shape where that hole was at the back. So if you can see it from the outside, fantastic. If you can't, then just do it from the inside and press up through. Having found the hole, if you look carefully at chestnut casings, you will spot that they're actually in 3 segments, so 3 bits that stand out slightly, and there's grooves that run around. So we're going to mimic exactly the same. So the first one's going to go straight up towards the bottom of the house, the door, so that makes it nice and easy. And sort of see where you think directly opposite. So for me, directly opposite is probably going to be just above the door there. Then we're going to go out on a line like this, aiming towards that same point, and then the third one will be in the middle of those 2, again curling up till it meets the same point. So what we're then left with in these gaps is sort of like very wide diamond, flat diamond shapes, and what we're going to do is going to add an extra layer of clay in here so that these are bulbous, and then we've got these lines left in the middle. So take all of your remaining green clay and put it back through on a thicker setting of the pasta machine. So on my machine, I'm going to put it through on setting number 2. And really, it's just a case of a rough estimate. So go wider than your piece is, so it sort of sits so you've got the points either side, and then just do a rough, quite wide, sort of round shape. It doesn't have to be exact, and see how you fit. So it doesn't need to be exactly up against the line, so you want to be a little bit wide. That's going to go over there. And actually, that one wasn't too bad for a first guess. So that's certainly good enough for what I want. So do another one. So this one's definitely not wide enough, which is good because I just wanted to show you what you do if it doesn't quite fit. So obviously I've got quite an extra band there. So simply cut yourself an extra bit to fit on the side. And then the last one. Because you'll find they are all different, even though you tried being neat. And that doesn't matter because in real life, if you look at the chestnut, they're not exactly even, the 3 pieces. That one's way too big. So we'll push that there, and then the rest can go inside the hole. Okay, so I'm just going to roll over where I did the joins, and then as always chop away any of the excess. Put the green on one side because we're going to use that later on, and then where you've added these extra bits, just roll it down towards those grooves you made on both sides. So what you should end up with is a rough shape where you've got these sort of bulbous 3 sections with the grooves in between, and then we've got the bits where the doors are chopped out. And now we're going to start having the fun bit and decorating all the rest. So find your leftover bits of brown to start with. Take one piece and do the rolling and the folding a little bit more until when you chop down through the middle of it, the pattern you see is almost completely sort of dark colours, but sort of just quite nicely all mixed and matched in together. So with that, keep one bit larger and one bit can go quite small. And just cut yourself slices and place them randomly around the chestnut. I mean, if you look on something like this, you'll see there's quite big areas of brown and sometimes just little dots. And as they get more and more close to when the nut's going to come through, they go even darker and there's even more blemishes start. So put as many or as few on as you like, but make sure you have at least a fair amount of the green still showing through so you can see what it is you're doing. And just take thin slices, and all you're going to do is you're going to place them at some stage on your piece. So you can have a sort of an area like that, and once you're happy with it, then you'll just, with the needle or other blending tool, whatever you're using, just push in and sort of make a random area. You'll also want to do some of the smaller pieces. Some of them just go separately, and they could be where some of the points are going to come out. Other ones could be to join and go off at a slight tangent from some of the larger areas. But just take your time and work your way all over the whole piece until you've got as many or as few as you want doing. Once you've got your piece all covered with all the brown, get yourself some black pepper, some ground black pepper. Put it on a piece of paper and then roll your piece over. Put the excess pepper somewhere safe, obviously not back in the pot to use. And then taking your texture sponge, when I'm doing things now, I will tend to put my hand inside the casing, so I'm not touching too much on the outside. But just go over and give a nice texture all over your piece. This helps press the pepper in, but also gives a nice grounding so that pieces that you can't get to later are already textured. And now for the fun part. This is where we start to add all the spikes. And rather than putting them on, because we've got this nice thickness of clay, we're going to pull them up out of the clay. If you have exceptionally long nails, this might prove slightly more difficult. You're going to have to try and do it with these parts of your fingers. But effectively, for your first one, start where there's a brown dot, and literally just push the clay up, and then repeat, getting as close as you can to each one, depending on what your fingers and nails are like. And you're going to work all over the surface doing that. When you've done a few, go back with your texture sheet and push that down and see if you can get the texture back round, and also get out any fingernail marks that you might have put in. And as I say, simply repeat that over the whole of the piece. The only place to be aware of is where you've got the door. Think about where you're going to put the lichen, which will be coming down for mine on this sort of side, seeing as my hinges were on this side. And then just make sure you're not putting any right where you would put the lichen. Okay, so I will carry on doing that, and I will bring you back when I have got that one all done. When I finished doing the last of the round pull-ups, my fingers were literally inside here, holding it like this so as I could go around. Once I'd done that, I neatened off all of these bits by cutting them round again. And if you're cutting with a craft knife, please do make sure your fingers are well out of the way when you're cutting, if your fingers are in the middle. I then took the little piece we had, which we were going to do the door frame with, a little bit of liquid clay, added it round the door. Found my template again and made sure that when I put the template on, it was going to be the right size for the door, with enough room on this side that I could push the hinges in. I then put a little bit of liquid clay on the area back here, pushed our piece in that we'd already baked, pulled the wire nicely tight on the inside, and with a little bit of our cut off, left off clay of that colour, just added a little oblong of the clay on the inside to cover over where the metal was showing through. So we got through to the stage now where we want to actually start making our lichen steps to go around the outside. So I've got my lichen colours, and I was going to put them in a fairly random order, doesn't matter which order you put them in. Give them a bit of a roll. And I'm going to put them through a pasta machine that way down on a medium-ish setting, so setting number 3 on my machine. And each time I'm going to put through, fold and put back, fold first, put it through, fold top to bottom, put back through first, as if I was doing a sort of Skinner blend, but only doing it probably sort of 4 or 5 times, just to start a blend going, but not to get a full Skinner's blend. There we go, that's our blend starting to come. And then I was going to chop that, because we only want thin pieces, into 3. Put them back, again in a random way. So I've obviously matched that end, but I haven't matched it that end. Give it a bit of a roll. And then we're going to put it back through the pasta machine, thin end first, to get a really nice long strip on your thinnest usable setting. So for me, that is setting number 9. And then roll up from one end to the other. You don't need to worry about being neat, because this is just a pattern of lichen, so it can be different each step. We only need a couple of slices, so take the top one off, see what pattern is you've got. And you should have a nice sort of swirly lines round. And take 2, probably about that thickness, so I don't know, about sort of 1/6 of an inch, probably about 1/4 of a centimetre, something like that, so quite chunky enough to work well as steps. Not thin enough that they're going to fall apart in the oven. Chop them in 2. And these are going to be our steps. So first thing to do is I'm just going to pinch down the sides so they're not quite as chunky. And then working one at a time with, again, something like the cable needle, just press in now and again to give a sort of a fluted edge and look. And then either with a needle, a cocktail stick, or the blunt end of your craft knife, just do a sort of little radial pattern going out from the centre. Turn over, do the same on the underneath. And repeat for all 4 pieces. So with a little bit of liquid clay on a small brush, just paint a line under where the door frame is and where the top or the entrance to the fairy house door is. Find probably your biggest one and put it right next to it. Now the trick to these, to get them to stay on, is holding the piece as lightly as you can with the edge piece. Just try and fold that down until it runs in to the outside of the casing. Do that both sides. And that should hold it on steadily enough that you can then start to push the piece in. Now with this top one, it should sit nicely right next to the step, so there should be enough there to push it in and hold it. You do it top and bottom, just push gently into the green clay. Always go back in and texture. And obviously any places where you've flattened it out, you can go back in and put some of those texture lines in. So that's the first one. The next one sits just below and going back round to the bottom. Now if you happen to have one of these spikes sticking up sort of underneath, you can bring it forward and sort of bring it even further under to create a bit of a support for the steps as they go down. But exactly the same. A little bit of liquid clay. And just sit your next piece on. Each time you do one, set your piece down flat to check that these are actually sitting upright as far as the placement goes, and then just carry on with the next one. So this next one's going to sit down here, and there's one either side, which is quite good. And I'll probably just get one last one on as it goes round right towards the back. So I'm just going to pull this down slightly just to fit him on. And we'll put our last one actually probably just touching onto the twig or the stalk as it goes round. So I'll just bend that round to fit on there. Okay, so there you have all your steps going around the outside, leading up to the door of your fairy house. And now last but not least, let's put that door on. When it first comes out of the oven, sort of make sure that the hinges aren't attached. Those top two are absolutely fine. And at this stage, push the head pin right down and chop it off as close to the bottom as you can get. But then pull it up ever so slightly because you need to get an access to it. You are then going to put some liquid clay where the door hinges will go and sit your door in place so it nicely closes over the step and over the entrance. Now you might have to push it in a bit here. And don't worry too much about that, but just make sure it sits pressed down in so it's going to sit nice and flat against the piece. Now these two top hinges, the one at the top and the one at the bottom, need to be pressed really well into that clay. Once they are done and they're pressed well in, gently open up the door, pull out the pin. And it doesn't matter if it's stuck into the door frame, just open out a space for it to go in, because if it's got space to go out, then when we have to push it back in after the piece is baked, it'll have space to go in. So if it needs a channel, just create a proper channel for it to fit in. So it is a bit fiddly. If it starts to come out, the hinges start to move, press them back in place. And then what should happen is that when you remove the door, you can take the door out, but the hinges stay where they were. So if you need to, press them in just fractionally more, but if you press those in, then create a nice deep groove in between them, so that the door can fit in place. You can even put it back in very quickly just to make sure you've still got the right place. Because what we're going to do is once we've baked, we don't bake it with the door on, the door comes off, and once it's baked, the door pops on, and then the pin, of course, should be able to go through all 3 hinges, and then you will have an opening door. There's 2 things left to do. First is the windows, and I've gone for a very simple solution with the windows and only done translucent clay. And then the last thing to do, once you've done the windows as well, is to decide if you want to put any of the more pointy points on, and we'll come on to those in just a second. But to start with, let's do the windows. So for that you need a bit of the translucent clay on a nice thin setting. So I'll put some translucent clay through on setting number 7, and I will use the larger of my cutters, the larger than the window, to cut 2 circles, and then we just sit it on the inside of our fairy house. So there's are the 2 circles chopped out with that cutter, and then I'm just going to, on the inside, just round, put a little bit of liquid clay all the way around the window surround on both sides. Give a final last look, which actually you need to do before you put the liquid clay on, to make sure that your windows are nice and neat. You need to make sure your hands are clean and dry and non-sticky, and then carefully pop that in, put it in place, swap round, do the same with the other side, and then once you've got them in place, with your needle just press down to secure the 2 windows firmly in place on the liquid clay. And as I say, that could be you completely finished. However, if you want to add even more detail, we can add now some extra little spikes on. And how I'm going to do this for the extra spikes is how, if for instance your nails were so long that you had real problems getting the spikes up at this stage, you could do all of the spikes, some big ones and some small ones, using this technique instead. So get some green clay or some brown clay or a mixture of the both. So sometimes I will just literally grab bits and sort of smush them together, so I've got a little bit of the brown in with the green. And then pull yourself up a small point. Chop it off. And repeat. And repeat lots of those for however many you want. You can make them as thin or as big as you like. If you twist and roll to create the spike, then the markings, of course, will spiral and it doesn't look quite so natural. Having got your pieces, create a slight point on the underneath. And then, as always, holding with 2 fingers in the top, just look at somewhere where you think you might want some extra spikes. So say this side of the door, and just create some holes where you think they might sit. Not too deep. Add a little bit of liquid clay to them. And then very gently push your spikes in. With a cocktail stick, just roll down the bottom of them slightly, just to press them more into the underneath clay. And then you can also, as well, just give a little bit of texturing down the bottom, just poking in with the end of the cocktail stick. can also then go back with the texture and do a bit of texturing around them as well, and do as many or as few of those as you like. But once you're completely done, with a little bit of card in the bottom, if you want to make sure it's not going to go shiny, just sit your piece in there. If you haven't got anything to support underneath your steps, then you can always pop in some little bits of tightly packed up foil just to act as supports under the steps. So I'll do another one for under there, and then tent the whole thing as always in foil to protect it should the oven spike during baking. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to add a few more of these extra points and sort of spikes on, and then I will put it in the bowl, bake it all, and I will bring you back when it is completely finished. To make the flower petal roof, we're going to create the peacock petal cane, and that is a cane that I did a tutorial for a couple of weeks ago, and I will put a link to the tutorial below the video down here. I did it as a separate tutorial for two reasons. Firstly, because I got loads of comments when I started posting photos about that one, so I thought I'd do it as a quick one, and I knew it would take longer to get the rest of this project finished, but also because it saves time in this one. So if you don't know how to do the peacock petal cane, pop on over to that video and have a look. And for this one, I will fast forward through most of it, just so you get the idea, to remind you if you have already seen it, but definitely follow that one. So the colours I'm using in this are very much more muted than I had in the peacock petal tutorial, because that was obviously nice and bright, whereas this, I want this all to merge in and look more naturalistic. So as with most Skinner blends, I'm going to cut diagonally through the end bits, straight down the middle. I've put these all through on setting number 2 of my pasta machine, simply because we're working with a lot of clay here, and otherwise on setting number 3 it would make it too wide. And as per normal, I'm just going to push those colours down at a slight diagonal, so they'll all mix together, and we'll end up with more of the tangerine on the end. I'm just going to chop that bit off there. Put it up to the top. If you wish, give it a little bit of a roll. And because I've got lots of layers here, because by the time I pick this up and fold it over, we're now going to have 4 layers of clay. I will put it through on one setting thicker than I had done for this one, so this will now go through on setting number 1. From this point, I will fast forward through to the stage at which we're ready to do our inserts, and bring you back at that stage. Having got our insert ready, I'm just going to wrap it in a layer of the bronze coloured clay, and that's on setting number 7 of my pasta machine at the moment, and then I'll put the rest of the bronze clay down through onto setting number 9 as we start to create this nice long piece of inserts and insert them into this piece in exactly the same way as we do in the peacock petal video. Once I got it roughly to the shape I wanted, and so I'll still possibly just get that slightly neater, those long points, you'll see I probably noticed that I was pressing down on it, and what I was doing, I was actually pressing down to make it more squat, because that spreads it out. Because what I'm looking for the right size for the house we've got, I need this to be about 2.5 inches long that way, so about 6.5 centimetres, and a couple of inches wide, so about 5 centimetres wide. And so that's why I was pressing it down, to get it like that. So once you've done that, you then got to take some slices. I'm just going to slice off a single slice to start with, just to even it up and see what the pattern is that we've got inside. Okay, so that's going to be our petal pattern for our roof. I'm not worried too much at the moment, the fact that this is slightly uneven and this is uneven, because obviously this is a petal we're going for, which is a nice natural look. So all I need to do now is to take 5 slices, because I want 5 petals. So I'm going to do them relatively thick, probably at that sort of size, so probably about 1/6 of an inch, about sort of 3 to 4 millimeters thick. So I'm going to do it, because I've got this flat side, with the flat side down, and then when I cut down, I'm slicing down, going in that direction. So you always go in the direction where your piece is flat. If you've got one of the slicing machines, then by all means use that instead. I have got one, and it's fantastic for doing canes, but for something like this, where I'm only doing a few slices, I'm only going to cut one at a time, because I'm then going to pick it up and, if necessary, just reshape it slightly. So if there is any distortion, bring it back up and reshape it throughout each slice. So I'm going to have to bring this towards me, because when I cut my slices, I do it completely overhead. But you saw how I did that one there, and I do it exactly the same way. And as I say, I will cut a slice and then move on. So there we go, there are our 5 slices. In actual fact, I didn't reshape it as I was going, because it didn't distort that much. It has a little bit, so all I will then do is I'll actually pull this down and round it round to make it sort of more even with that side. And you can pull and push and reshape these however you want. I will also just pinch right along the edge, so we haven't got a nice thick edge, so it's slightly more tapered, and do that for each piece. Where you've reshaped, you'll quite often find that the cane pulls apart, so choosing which bit's going to be uppermost, which side of the petal for each one's going to be uppermost, I'm just going to roll over that, making sure that any gaps are pushed together. And then with each petal, I'm going to take our piece of lined material with those nice grooves, put that down so that the grooves are running that way, fold that over the top, and press over the whole of the piece. That then gives us a nice texture to our piece, and I'll put that down to one side and repeat with the other pieces. Having got our petals all ready to go, we need something to support them on when we bake them, to create that nice raised look. So find something. This just happens to be a half sphere that I bought online. Just draw around it to create a circle. This one's about 3.5 inches or 8 centimetres across, which for the size we're doing at the moment works out fine, but obviously get whatever size you like. Cut round. We're going to cut out a circle in the middle of this, so we want to find where the centre is. So find a line whereby it sits inside, and for this one, because it's 3.5 inches across, if I just put one small square inside, then I know, for instance, that that's a centre line, and that's a centre line, so that's my middle cross. It doesn't need to be any more than that, and because all we're going to do is we're going to take another round cutter, put it as central as we can, and go around the inside. And again, for that I just had to pull it towards me so I could see it was central, and then simply cut through. Start just to give it a bit of a curl to the card. And what we're going to create is a little cone shape. So have a couple of bits of sticky tape ready to go. And hopefully by now your piece should be out of the oven, and we'll come back to this one in a minute. But just for now, we want to get the right size cone. So you want something that's going to sort of sit about the same circumference as your piece was. So once you've got that sorted, just a couple of bits of sticky tape. If it's uneven, just even it off just to make it easier when it sits in the bowl. Just do a quick double check that you think that will sit nicely on. Remembering it's going to flare out quite a bit past that. And once you're happy, get the bowl that you're going to sit your piece in and start putting your petals on it. Now the petals should flop down quite a lot further down than your piece. Just press the first one on. The second one's going to overlap slightly, but don't press down too much at the moment, just get it roughly in place because we can always adjust this later if necessary. Third one again slightly overlaps. Fourth one, same thing, slight overlap. And then what you want to do, the fifth one overlaps that one, but then if you lift up the first one so that this fifth one actually sits underneath the last one, so they all go round slightly overlapping the preceding one. So then just spend a bit of time neatening it out, making sure you've got sort of even spread of the petals. Then with the side of the needle, as always, just press them down to make sure that those, just at halfway up, they start to join in so that it'll hold them steady during the baking process. Create a little hole still with these. Get your piece we made earlier, which is going to be the hook on top, and either with or without, never hurts just add a little bit more extra liquid clay when it's a baked piece already. Just put a little bit of extra around the bottom of that. Pop him in there. Pull these petals up around it. Go back and with your material, anywhere that you've pressed down which now doesn't have any texture, go back and retexture. And then lastly, if you want to, just go around and create sort of slightly more shape in the edge of your petals. Make them curl up slightly randomly. When you're happy with that and it's sitting nice and centrally in your bowl, as before, tent the whole thing in foil and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. Whilst that piece is baking, let's come back to our finished one, which hopefully has cooled slightly, and let's see whether or not we can fit our door in. So take the pin out, fit that door in place, and pop that back in. Quite often needs a little bit of a wiggle round, and pop it down through all three pieces. Once that's pushed down in, then you should have an opening and closing door. Just right for your fairies. And then the last thing to do is just to cover the windows with any sort of translucent paint, or I'm going to use the alcohol inks and just little dabs of colour until you've got a nice design. Either do it on the front or on the inside. When I'm using the alcohol inks, I'll just put little dots down onto a tile, so you just put the smallest amounts onto your brush. And when you're happy, just let that dry. Cut yourself a strip of card that's big enough to go around your biggest cutter that you use to make the top hole in your piece, and get yourself a piece of sticky tape waiting again. And what you actually want to do is to curl this card, so give yourself a head start, round the outside, but then pop it inside here, because what we want is a piece that will actually fit inside the hole that you've got left. Once you know you've got roughly the right size, chop off the excess so you're as near as you can be, and then sticky tape over the top of that. Get some of the leftover green clay, chop a piece that's roughly the right height, and again, just to give you a bit of a heads up, get a piece that's going to fit around the outside, and then put it so it's going to go around the inside. If you can, curl that bit up so you get as much of it around the outside as you can. But it doesn't matter too much, because what you can do is you can actually just press it so it goes to the right width of your cardboard tube. Roll over the join on the inside to make it neat. Carefully just take off the excess, both top and bottom, and bake that according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. And whilst we're waiting for all of those pieces to be ready, I've got my white clay and my green clay, and then I've cut, these are through on setting number 4 on my pasta machine, so slightly thinner than normal because it's only small pieces we were using, and on the same setting I've cut myself roughly the same amount of some of the leftover green, and we've got my leftover copper to hand and a little bit of the Sahara from where we very first started. And we're just going to do a skinner blend with these 3, so as normal, diagonally down the end, straight down the middle, and I will put back through. I will actually still go through setting number 2, even though these are on thinner on number 4, because that will give me a nice size of skinner blend for what I'm wanting to do for the leaf. And for the leaf, all we're going to do is exactly the same as we've done previously. So we will get it till we've got our nice blend, probably chop into 2 pieces, layer them up, put it back through, darker green end first on the same setting of the pasta machine, and then put it through into nice long thin strip on our thinnest usable setting of the pasta machine. So I will bring you back when I got it to that stage, and then as we did with the very initial start of our peacock petal cane, we're going to roll it from the white end all the way up to the green end to give ourselves a nice log of blended clay. As before, chop it into quarters. Pull up the sides of the quarters and push in at the bottoms. But this time stop at that point, turn it on its other side, and putting the larger, if you've got a small piece and a larger bit, put the larger bit on the bottom, and just bend your pieces over. So you're almost forming a sort of a semicircle shape. Okay. Open it up. Put some of the copper coloured clay from one end to the other along the length, but not quite going out the top of one side. Take off the excess, put a little bit of this clay through, that was still through on setting number 9, which was the one we'd been using when we'd been doing our petal cane. So this one I'm going to put through on setting number 7. Chop these 2 pieces in half. And not quite to the top of that, but down there. put your two halves together and then start to change into slightly more of a leaf shape, where this is the bottom stem and this is the top of the leaf. So I'm pushing it sort of flatter towards the bottom. Making more of a leaf shape. Don't need to be very big, so you've got more than enough for what you need here. In fact, if you want to chop off a bit, start with so you can see what you've got, and then keep one bit large for perhaps another project and make one probably about half that size. So I'm going to push in with my thumbs and fingers, make it more diamond shape, and then flatten out across the bottom and round the sides till we get more back to that nice leaf shape. When you've got a shape and size you're happy with, just cut 5 slices. I'll show you the shape we've got now. So we're going to take 5 slices of those and they will sit at the top of our petal roof. Same with the slices. I'm just pinching the sides so they're not quite so straight. Put those pieces to one side, and then when our roof comes out of the oven we can add these to it and finish and put the collar on the inside and finish the whole thing. If you want to, and only if you want to, because you might be very happy with how yours is, but it's sometimes nice just to add a little bit of extra dark right on the tips of some of these points, and or just to add a little bit of extra if you feel you haven't quite got enough going around the outside. And I will literally just go over, just add a little bit of brown to the tops of some of these, particularly to some of the extra little small bits that I added when we were adding additional bits in, and even sort of just around the bottom of them to make them blend in slightly. So again, only if you want to. This is just like dry brushwork because I've got, say, just a very, 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 very tiny amount on the tip of my brush, and just go around and add extra detail. And then having a wet wipe to hand, I'm just going to brush a little bit down into those gaps that I made. We've probably got boards. Take off the excess, but it just means you can see more clearly where we put those details in. Okay, with our pieces out of the oven, we are very nearly there. It's the first chance you're going to see sort of what it will look like with the roof on it. So with the roof, you should be able to just very carefully peel away the cardboard cone. For this bit underneath here, you can either chop off or bend round the wire, because it's the aluminium, you can bend it round very, very easily. But even so, I would recommend taking a chunk of just your leftover green clay and just pushing that on just to hold that nice and firmly in place. With your collar, just run your thumb or fingernail under and hopefully that should slip off fairly easily. Just double check that it will still sit inside your house, and then we just need to get that to sit inside there. So all we're going to do, take a piece of your green clay, roll it into a thickish band. They're already about 1/4 of an inch or 3/4 of a centimetre. So big enough that it will fit round. And then with a little bit of liquid clay, just smudge some on around the inside, so it just gives a nice place for that clay to sit. Pop the ring of clay there. Push it up towards the sides so that it really adheres nicely. We'll neaten this off in just a second. with the texture sheet, just go in and give it some nice texture all around, making sure you hold it carefully in your hands to make sure it doesn't break at all. Check that you've got the clay in the right place so you can actually press that in. And then a little bit of clay on the very top. And very carefully and gently press the lid in. If you want to, open out on the inside, particularly if you want to add one of those bottle lights. Check the size that you're going to have left over to make sure you can fit something inside. Again, you can pull the clay up over and around the collar and go back in and texture it again to make it as neat as you can. Just check that it's going to sit nicely on your piece. And then last but not least, let's just add the leaves to the top. So again, a little bit of liquid clay where the leaves overlap, or the petals overlap rather, and then just pop the leaves on. And for these, I'm going to do it how Mother Nature generally does it. So one there, miss out one, do the next one along, miss out one, do the next one along, and you'll end up that one there, and the final one on there. And I'm just going to pull the tops up and around our handle. Just smear them in so it looks as though they've come straight out of the brown clay. Either texture with this or with the material, and that is your lid and the petal roof completely finished. So the last thing we need to do is to bake that again, and depending on how high your collar is, put a whole load of foil so that just sits inside and will support the lid. And then, as always, bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. And when we come back, that's the whole thing finished. So there we go. The top is finished, it's all finished baking, and I've popped it on. I've got the little lights on inside, and when you open up the door, you can see the little fairy lights. And if you just dim the lights slightly, then you get that lovely glow of the fairy lights inside through the windows. So the bottom stays very much the same throughout all the variations I've done, but just to show you a couple of other variations on the roof. So this one is very similar. So I've got the pearl going into sort of a yellow, going into the soft tangerine, and again with this one I added some of the dolphin grey into the tangerine to dull that down quite a lot. The dots are the same colour more or less, except I've put them slightly a different way up, so the dark was towards the bottom and the light was towards the top. And also with this one, although I outlined it with the chocolate colour, I then used the pearl to go down this as the stripe. So there's very little of the lines going down this one that you get in the others. And this one, slightly smaller one, because this is the one I was starting off when I was first experimenting. So for this one I did basically a little bit of bronze, then into gold, and then into the pearl. And this time for the inserts I've done a flamingo down to white, and again the same as with this one, I outlined it in a bronze but then also outlined it in a layer of pearl, and then all the stripes going down this one again were the pearl. As another option, if you do want to make a fairy house or have any lights in it but wanted to make it into a box, then don't do the hinges on the door, simply press this door flat into the outer bit on the top, make a larger hole rather than the size we've got, and then do exactly the same but make it much larger so that the roof fits on a bit like the lid of a box, and then you'd have a little conker shell fairy house box. So there we have it, there's all the finished fairy conker shell houses. I hope you enjoyed that one and have great fun making some of your own. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thank you for those of you who subscribe. I really do appreciate it. Right, I'm off to have another forage around, see what I can do for my next project. That's it for now. See you next time. Bye.